As global turbulence becomes the new normal, business leaders are being forced to rethink assumptions that have held for decades. Welcome to another edition of the Global Reset with me, Prashant Nair, on CNBC TV 18 Prime. Each day we try and unpack the economic and geopolitical forces shaping our world, always with a sharp focus on what it means for India's future. This is where we make sense of tariffs, trade wars, shifting world order, and of course, the fast-changing realities of multipolarity and global competition, all through the lens of Indian interests and ambitions. Today, we're joined by two distinguished global voices who bring insight into this new era of uncertainty and opportunity. Jennifer Gavito is the senior advisor at the Cohen Group and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. With an extensive career at the intersection of U.S. statecraft, diplomacy and security, including deep expertise in the Middle East policy and strategic competition, Jennifer is uniquely placed to break down the logic behind President Trump's tariffs, the recalibration of U.S.-China relations, and of course, the new so-called transactional global order. Joining her is Amy Holmes, Associate Professor of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service in Washington, D.C. Dr. Holmes is an academic and commentator on U.S. foreign policy, global great power competition and security strategy. Her research covers the evolution of the US-led liberal order, the challenges posed by economic nationalism, and the strategic dilemmas facing countries like India as they seek growth amid rival camps and volatile geopolitics. Jennifer and Amy, great to have both of you here on the program. Thanks very much. You know, we speak to so many CEOs and experts and economists, and this word never seen in what we're seeing now is unprecedented. It's a break of the global order we had for the last 50 years. Are we overhyping it? Are we underplaying it? Jennifer, let me start with you at a broad level.
Thanks so much, first of all, for having me. It's great to be here. I think probably overhyping it and underplaying it are both apt descriptions of what we've seen over the last several months of trade policy with the Trump administration. On one hand, certainly he and his advisors are being driven by a deep-seated feeling that the the international trading order has not been fair to the United States, to its producers, to its consumers. And so there's really a disruptive tendency to take a hard look at how the U.S. trades. That being said, you know, we've certainly seen indications that the Trump administration understands public sentiment, they understand markets, they understand market reactions. And so I think a lot of the pendulum swinging that we've seen over the last couple of months in reaction to those market reactions has been indicative of a willingness to kind of back down when the markets react in a way that is not positive. And so I think we're going to continue to see this as negotiations continue, as we did this week with the issuance of new letters that are clearly intended to be a negotiating tool. So I think there's a lot of back and forth still to come before we know exactly how this ends.
Jennifer, and you do believe that this is rooted in reality, but it's also in a way, it's something that President Trump and his top team really believes in, right? I mean, and President Trump has been remarkably consistent. Go back 25 years and watch his videos from, back in the days. He's spoken about 30% tariffs on China even back then. I mean, so this comes from a deeper place in that sense, right? That he's going to do it. He wants to do it.
He very much wants to do it. I think that the challenge up until now has been getting the nuanced understanding of what the impacts of this are and how to do this, as they would say, with a scalpel and not an axe. And so you can address trade imbalances and trade protectionism from other countries in a way that is consistent with what U.S. comparative advantage is. And I think that's the inconsistency that maybe we've seen thus far and that still needs to be worked out by the administration to get to a place that marries, as you note, President Trump's longstanding belief that fundamentally this is unfair to the United States, with the realities that the United States cannot produce everything domestically, and that consumers do need to buy from our international partners in order to keep global supply chains moving the way that we want them to.
Amy, comment on that. I mean, the same first question, right? I mean, are we overplaying this thing? As some have said, right? I mean, it's one term, and maybe things all go back and we reset like they were. I'm not so sure that's possible, but what's your sense? Are we overplaying this, or this is actually underhyped and this is bigger in terms of a break from the past?
Well, thank you also for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I guess if you want to look at the bigger picture domestically, also here in the United States, is that Trump is basically he's figured out a way to raise taxes, because tariffs are essentially taxes, that will, he hopes, help reduce the federal budget deficit, right? I mean, because over the past 50 years, voters in the United States, they generally don't vote for presidents who raise taxes. And so Trump has sort of brilliantly figured out a way to raise taxes through these tariffs without calling them taxes. In 2024, U.S. federal spending was about 6.8 trillion. Government revenue, however, was just 4.9 trillion. And so that budget deficit of 1.8 trillion is what he's trying to close through these tariffs. But it's too early to see whether he will be able to achieve that. But that's kind of, I think, his strategy and why he's doing this.
And Amy, in your sort of opinion, we will, I mean, it's up in the air. What will end state tariffs be? I'm not looking for a number here, but do you think the administration is determined to follow through in a big way? I mean, they think they can collect large amounts of this tariff revenue?
Well, he's already backtracked several times, right? And so it could be that he backtracks from these grandiose sort of promises or threats, as other countries may view them. But we'll see what happens on August 1st. I mean, that's the next deadline. So it's the situation is a bit volatile and unpredictable across many issue areas since the new administration has come into office, which is normal. I mean, every administration is characterized often by a bit of chaos as new people come in and testing out new policies. But I think it's fair to say that this administration has been particularly unpredictable.
What does it mean, and this is to both of you, Jennifer, if you want to go first, for other countries, right? I mean, around the world, and so much has been written about this, right? I mean, you're kind of sort of alienating your friendships with countries which stood rock steady for many, many years. Of course, President Trump believes that those friendships were based on, the U.S. was unfairly treated in that sense. But in any case, these countries are not going to feel happy at what is being done. Where does it leave, I mean, U.S.'s allies? Because it's not just about trade, right? Because it affects everything else.
Absolutely. It affects the very foundations of these alliances that have existed in the post-World War II era. As diplomats, we used to say that U.S. foreign policy has been remarkably consistent across administrations since World War II, both Republican and Democratic. And I think that, starting in 2016, but certainly now over the last 6 months, that theory has really been tested. Those alliances that, really were built on much stronger ideals than, simply transactional diplomacy are being tested in very real ways. And you see that certainly playing out in the case of, for example, NATO. So I think it is leading our partners to question how reliable the United States is as an ally and what the implications for that are. And my prediction is that, certainly they will continue to work with us. We continue to be a key trading partner for most of these countries. We continue to, through our private sector, offer the very best of innovation. And so for that reason, I think the United States will continue to be a strong partner, but maybe not the only partner. And we see whether it's in the Middle East, in the Gulf, or partners in Europe as they look towards enhancing their own defense industries, for example. we see those allies looking elsewhere to diversify those alliances, to diversify those partnerships in ways that can withstand some of these shocks that come when the U.S. And its foreign policy and defense and national security positions vacillate in ways that we haven't seen previously.
So in a way, diversification, right? I mean, other countries would like to not overly depend on the U.S., which they did. I mean, they'd like sort of other options in that sense. And, in the financial markets, we talk about this, is U.S. exceptionalism fading, right? I mean, and many have pointed out that maybe it's not what other countries are doing, but the administration of the U.S., right, which of course is causing this exceptionalism to fade a little bit. But Amy, would you agree with that? That is essentially the outcome from other countries' point of view with this volatile policy?
Well, there's been a long debate about American exceptionalism and, how exceptional is the United States really in various ways compared to other countries in the world and also compared to other previous, superpowers or leading powers in the global economy. I think that, the U.S. we went through a financial crisis in 2008, as your viewers perhaps recall, and yet the U.S. sort of emerged out of that stronger, arguably. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with these new policies that Trump is trying out. But regarding the larger question of our alliances, I do think that I agree fully with Jennifer that the NATO alliance has been a defining sort of feature of U.S. leadership in the world. And I believe that some of our adversaries in Russia, for example, or China perhaps are envious of this large network of allies and partners that we have that has been, fairly rock solid now for 75, 76 years. And so, it's my hope that we will be able to continue our leadership in this alliance and in other alliances. But some of what Trump has done, has caused some of our closest allies to question how reliable the United States is, and will we actually continue, to uphold our commitments in NATO and elsewhere.
Jennifer, Amy, hang in there. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, very short. Coming right back, and we'll continue this interesting conversation. Welcome back. You're with us here on the Global Reset on CNBC TV 18 Prime. We're in conversation on the big stuff. Amy and Jennifer have been sort of running us through their views, geopolitics, trade policy, and more. Guys, thanks for waiting. With regards to Russia, though, I mean, I'm just mentioning this because this has happened over the last 24, 48 hours or so. It looks like a bit of a U-turn from President Trump, right? I mean, he was kind of sort of hoping that he'd be able to get peace, but now he's saying, well, I'm ready to send weapons to Ukraine. But of course, they're going to pay for it, and I'm going to sanction Russia in a quote-unquote severe way. 50 days is what he's saying. So, I mean, he's happy to assist, but he wants to get paid. Jennifer, any thoughts on the Russia situation before we go any further?
Sure. I mean, I think what is happening now with President Trump understanding that Putin's intent was never to end the war in Ukraine really speaks to the importance of a strong national security infrastructure. We have experts within the U.S. government who have decades of experience working with President Putin and certainly understand what his aspirations are with regard to Ukraine, but also other states in the former Soviet sphere. I'm relieved to see that President Trump has, acknowledged now what a number of people already knew, that this war is not coming to a quick end, and that President Putin, despite words to the contrary, has no intention of ending it or his aspirations to control wide swaths of Ukraine. So that I think is positive. Certainly, I think there is a debate to be had about how NATO in particular finances its operations. There's a reason that the request that allies pay a more substantial share of their defense towards their defense budgets, dates back to 2014, predating President Trump. This is something that, the burden sharing is something that, again, Republican and Democratic administrations have really been pushing our allies to take seriously. And certainly with the war on NATO's doorstep, it enhances the urgency of this. And so I think these are positive developments over the last couple of days. I think it was probably naive to believe that a war could be ended so quickly. But I think that the steps that President Trump is now taking signal that there's a better understanding now of where President Putin is and what needs to be done in order to hold Russia to account.
Amy, if you have any thoughts on the Ukraine-Russia situation, and of course what we're hearing from President Trump now, but even in the Middle East, right? I mean, it's quite remarkable in some ways how that Iran-Israel situation was handled. I just wanted your perspective and your first take on that as well.
Sure. So, I think that the instinct of wanting to end wars is a natural, perhaps, instinct. And I do, actually applaud President Trump for trying to bring some of these devastating wars, both in Ukraine and also in the Middle East, to an end. But there's a question of what are you willing to sacrifice to get there? And, it's also a question of understanding the motives, for example, of Putin. And I fully agree with Jennifer that I do not think Putin intends to end this war. And Trump, I think, has now come to realize that Putin cannot just be cajoled, and appeasing him is not going to work. And so it seems that Trump is now shifting again the strategy towards the Ukraine, but this is the larger sort of paradox of wanting to make peace, but not wanting to sacrifice, for example, Ukrainian sovereignty for that goal.
But that first instinct, Amy, right, is interesting. He's willing to speak with anyone. No one is taboo in that sense, right? And that is quite interesting. Actually, in a counterintuitive way, I mean, take Iran, for example. I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, Amy. What if he is able to get NATO get Iran into the global sort of trading fold in that sense? I don't know if it'll happen, not happen. Well, that's a big deal, right, if it happens? What's your sense, Amy?
Well, there's a lot of potential, what we call a peace dividend, right? If wars come to an end, the potential for a peace dividend that would benefit the economy could potentially be substantial in Ukraine, also in the Middle East. And I think that's what, the Abraham Accords, for example, the idea behind them is that, resolving these conflicts could eventually lead to, economic prosperity if the various regions in the Middle East would be integrated into an economic, trading sphere. And that's also partly what the India-Middle East IMEC corridor, the idea behind it. But of course, these are sort of grandiose plans, if you look at the actual reality on the ground in the Middle East and the conflicts there. But, as a guiding principle, I think it's something that we should, be working towards, but it's quite a ways in the distance still, I would say.
Jennifer, the same question to you. Is that sort of a naive way of looking at things, or you think it's the approach, of course, is unique?
The approach is unique, but as a former diplomat, I applaud the instinct to talk to everybody. I think that you have to carefully use that tool and deploy it in the best way possible to get what you're trying to achieve. But again, as an overall tactic, I think that this administration's willingness to engage directly in these conversations, including with Iran, is really important. If you look back to the conflict between Israel and Iran last month, and the U.S. involvement in that, I have to say up front that I think that was a very risky move with very little guarantee of success. I personally believe that we probably have not seen the end of Iran's response to that yet. They certainly have demonstrated in the past strategic patience when it comes to retaliating for attacks. That being said, I do think that it's not naive to think that you can take that situation, and given the willingness to engage directly with the Iranian regime, you can set a vision on the table for a different future for relations between the United States and Iran. Probably not between Israel and Iran, but certainly between the United States and Iran. And so I, would urge the administration to use this very unique window after the violence, at least in the immediate term, has stopped, and try to lay out a roadmap for what it might look like to extract the types of concessions from Iran that are necessary in order for it to rejoin the global trading order and to have, some degree of sanctions relief, which the regime is desperate for. And I think, in exchange, you'll see some degree of creativity from the Trump administration that maybe we haven't seen in the past, from more traditional foreign policy driven administrations, as far as willingness to lift those sanctions to, give American companies the opportunity to participate in the Iranian economy, et cetera. So, it's very fraught. I would still put the chances of success at less than half. But I do think that there is a unique window there that maybe hasn't existed in recent years to try to come to some sort of very uncertain peace.
Just have to sort of quickly sort of throw in China there, because that's the big one, right? And the competition is on so many fronts, the rivalries on so many fronts. Jennifer, what do you make of it? You think that's going to be the big sort of defining strategic competition which endures even as some of the smaller ones get resolved one way or the other?
I think that's right. The U.S. and China, two very different systems. China, again, if you talk about strategic patience, they have a strategic vision that extends out over decades, whereas the United States, really operates in 4-year election cycles. And so two very different approaches to competition. I think the United States, really best asset has always been our innovation, and the reliance that our partners have on us as strategic partners. And so I think as we look ahead to how we compete with China, it's really important that we keep that in mind and that we position ourselves in a way that makes us, continues to make us, a reliable strategic partner, with alliances that go beyond, again, not that transactional approach, but rather are, really embed in common values, common objectives, common strategies. I think that's what will continue to differentiate us, and that would give us our best chance of success. But this competition isn't going to fade. They're two enormous economies, extraordinarily important, and the world trading order can't exist without one of them. And so it's not a case of trying to, inch out China. It's figuring out how we collectively work together in a way that benefits the entire global trading system.
Amy, if you have any thoughts to add to that, but also talk about India a little bit. What should, I speak with global sort of voices all the time, and they say, well, India is uniquely positioned. It's part of the global south, but it kind of is, in a way, courted by many of the Western countries. Stable, large democracy, large sort of, domestic market, et cetera, as well. Growth rates, 6% plus, closer to 7%. So, how should a country like India play it in this fractured kind of a world? Do you think it needs to pick sides, which it traditionally has stayed away from, but at the same time it has old relationships with countries like, for example, Russia? How would you respond to this, Amy?
Well, that's a great question. That's getting back to this notion of great power competition or strategic competition, which we've been talking about for a number of years now. Is basically looking at this multipolar world that is emerging. And we've seen, because your program is called Global Reset, we think of this changing global landscape as a reset, right? From a unipolar world to a multipolar world. The collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, led to a collapse of the bipolar world after the Soviet Union collapsed. And I would just, because we're still on the topic of the Middle East, highlight that the fact that the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria really is also the collapse of a geopolitical order, because that regime was propped up by Russia and Iran. And the fall of that regime has really led to the decrease of Russian and Iranian influence, not only in Syria, but in the wider Middle East. And I think that's important for your viewers to sort of take seriously, because it is really a new landscape in Syria that is emerging. And it is an opportunity, I believe, for the United States and our allies and partners, including potentially India and others, to help usher in a better and more stable future. There are a lot of discussions going on now about what should the future government of Syria look like, and the importance of inclusivity, bringing in Syria's diverse communities, Muslim, Christian, Alawite, Druze, Kurd, etc. And India is actually a model in many ways for that, right? Because of India's incredibly diverse population and history. And so this is something that if we want to talk about India, I think it's important to see how India could potentially, be viewed as a model for some countries in the region, including Syria, that are undergoing these fragile transition processes. And Syria has been under sanctions for a long time. Now that Trump lifted those sanctions, there is the opportunity for investment in Syria, and the country desperately needs investment. It needs to be rebuilt. And so again, going back to the question of the IMEC, or the India Middle East corridor, I do hope that will, in the long term, lead to a better integration of India to countries in the Middle East and Europe.
I could have gone on, but running out of time here. Very, very interesting perspectives, and so varied, and I think we covered a lot of ground today. Amy and Jennifer, let me thank both of you for taking out the time and sort of speaking with us here on CNBC TV 18 Prime. I hope we will be able to speak to you, because as I began by saying, the news flow does not stop, and there is enough and more to discuss. A lot of it seems very big at times, but I think we need both of your expertise to figure out, as I began by saying, framing it, are we overhyping it, or we can sort of underplaying it? Thanks once again, both of you, for joining us here on this program.